There is a single, quiet word that can liberate an empath's entire life, yet it's the one they're most terrified to speak. For the deeply feeling person, the moment of truth arrives not in a grand gesture, but in the space between their soul's authentic refusal and the compliant yes that leaves their lips. This fracture, this quiet betrayal of the self, is the origin point of their deepest suffering. I have witnessed this pattern unfold in countless lives. The world does not wound the empath most severely. It is their own inability to turn it away that does. Understand this clearly. The word no is not a rejection of others. It is a sacred declaration of selfhood, a refusal to be devoured by the collective's unconscious demands. When you utter it, you are not shutting down your heart. You are reclaiming its throne from foreign occupation. The empath's path is a strange journey through reflected identities. From their earliest days, they learn that affection is a reward for tuning into others. That security is found in deciphering the emotional states of people around them before acknowledging their own inner weather. Picture the child who looks into a parent's eyes and intuitively absorbs their anguish before even hearing a single word spoken. This is the empath's creation story. It is not a celestial blessing, but a survival strategy, a mechanism honed in the crucible of emotional unpredictability. To sense everything is to build a shield against the volatile. But as time passes, the empath grows dependent on the emotional currents of those around them. They confuse shared feeling for life's purpose and compassion for their core identity. And so, the empath floats, becoming a sponge for the world, a container for sorrows that are not their own. They lose the boundary line where another's energy field ends and their own pure essence begins. They magnetize those who are starving for light, for the empath glows with an unguarded radiance. Toward the fractured, the self-absorbed, the spiritually depleted beings who instinctively recognize the empath's open doors. But what the empath fails to see is that such unchecked openness is not love. It is a profound abandonment of the self. It is the unconscious longing to feel necessary, because being needed once was synonymous with being safe. To voice that small, trembling no is to shatter that ancient agreement. The empath's spirit fights it, for no feels like an act of brutality, like a profound disloyalty, but in reality, it is the first step towards sovereignty. I name this initial phase the awakening of the container. When you establish a limit, you are not pushing another away. You are calling your spirit home. You are summoning your soul back from its long banishment. In this first stage of emotional liberation, the empath must face their shadow of culpability. It is a thick mist that rises every time they choose their own needs. This guilt is not ethical, it is inherited, archetypal. It is tied to the nurturer's wound. The primordial pattern of the caregiver who feels her value lies only in her capacity to serve. Many empaths unknowingly inhabit this archetype, trading their vital force to preserve a superficial peace. But peace founded on suppression is a delicate fantasy. It inevitably fractures under the weight of unspoken truths. The empath who dares to say no awakens the archetype of the sovereign, not a ruler of conflict, but of clear seeing. This is the second movement, integration through steadiness. The empath must learn to feel the full weight of guilt and still take aligned action. They must learn to withstand the tempest of another's displeasure without folding into worthlessness. In this intense pressure, a powerful transmutation takes place. Compassion is reborn from enmeshment into awakened awareness. You start to perceive that love without autonomy is not love at all, but captivity. Imagine standing before someone you cherish, someone who leans on your emotional reserves. You perceive their lack, their void, their grief. Every fiber of your being urges you to mend them, to absorb their ache into your own being, but this time you remain rooted. You breathe into the unease. You witness their pain without making it your possession. You see that their struggle is their own sacred passage, not yours. And in that profound stillness, a miracle unfolds. You start to experience your own energy as hallowed ground. You feel your inner light not as a resource to be spent, but as a sanctuary to be guarded. This knowing is the dawn of genuine empathy, compassion that knows its own borders. The third step, the most evolved state of emotional freedom, is what I term transcendence through clarity. It is the instant the empath realizes that deep feeling does not obligate endless absorption. It means perceiving through the heart's lens without being pulled under the waves. The transcendent empath no longer inquires, "What do they require from me?" but instead, "What essential truth is life revealing to me through this connection?" They cease to perform the role of savior in the dramas of others and step into the role of conscious observer in the psyche's grand play. You see, every relationship is an alchemical container, a sacred vessel where the unconscious patterns of two souls meet and are reshaped. When you over-identify with another's anguish, you disrupt their natural process. You steal from them the crucial chance to integrate their own shadow material. You believe you are their salvation, but you are actually depriving them of their growth. The unconscious mind, however, is infinitely patient. It will present the lesson again and again until you learn to release your grip. And so the empath's sacred no becomes the pivot point of metamorphosis. It is the word that realigns the psyche with its true center. Each no you offer to the outer world transforms into a yes, murmured to your inner universe. You begin to locate your core, not as a response to external stimuli, but as a stable axis, a calm center, immune to projection. This is the true essence of individuation, the harmonious blending of the inner opposites, the emergence of completeness. In my work, I've observed a common dream among empaths. They dream of being submerged in endless, dark waters or of facing an immense, oncoming wave. They feel powerless to resist the deluge of archetypal force that threatens to submerge the individual self. To endure, the dreamer must learn to stand upon the water's surface, to distinguish emotion from core identity. Only then does the wave transform from an agent of destruction into an agent of initiation. The ocean does not desire to destroy the empath. It wants them to discover they are not merely human form, but a consciousness that can navigate through darkness without extinguishing its own glow. Saying no is the first powerful stroke in that sacred navigation. It is the action that keeps you buoyant. It permits the empath to evolve from the archetype of the martyr to that of the sage. The martyr offers up their self to confirm their value. The sage gives from a place of overflow, never from depletion. The distinction between them is simple, yet immense: awareness. One gives unconsciously to endure, the other gives consciously to contribute. I remember one individual, a woman in her midlife, whose existence was a series of caregiving roles. She attracted damaged partners, emotionally absent, each one reflecting her own inner father void. She misinterpreted their neediness for genuine closeness. She said yes to every request, every summons, every late-night turmoil, until she found herself empty, frayed, nearing a breaking point. In a session, she cried out, "If I cease being their helper, what remains of me? And I responded, that very inquiry is the gateway to your liberation. The persona she had constructed, the perpetual supporter, was merely a mask hiding the deeper self that yearned not to fix others, but to be complete within herself. Her initial act of freedom arrived not from a monumental insight, but from a solitary no, a choice not to reply to a message from a man who depleted her spirit. She wept for days, not over him, but because she felt she had betrayed the very identity that once ensured her survival. But through that sorrow, a new consciousness was born. She began to feel the rhythm of her own heart once more. She began to live for her own existence. This is what I name the empath's great turning. The dissolution of the false self, constructed on acquiescence. It is the moment the soul ceases hemorrhaging for the world and starts to pulse from its own source. Every empath must journey through this symbolic death. It is not a penalty, but a rite of passage. The no becomes the sacred space where the false identity is dissolved. And what emerges from those ashes is the authentic self, spacious, discerning, luminous, and firmly grounded in its own sovereignty. Do not misinterpret this. The world requires empaths, but it requires awakened empaths, not indentured ones. The unconscious will persist in sending trials, individuals who trigger your guilt, circumstances that test your limits, until you learn that compassion without self-knowing is possession by the rescuer archetype. To save everyone is to defy the cosmic intelligence guiding their journey. To save yourself is to honor that same intelligence dwelling within you. The empath's transformation is therefore not a denial of sensitivity, but its elevation. It is the conversion of reactive empathy into reflective empathy. You stop being a reflection for others and become a reflection for the divine. Your no becomes not opposition but alignment. It vibrates with authenticity, synchronizing you with the archetypal rhythm of the self. And that, my friends, is the genuine meaning of emotional freedom. To experience everything without being consumed by everything. When you stand at this new threshold, a remarkable shift occurs. The very individuals who once depleted you will either change or drift away. The energy that once seeped out now circulates inward, feeding your inner knowing. Meaningful coincidences begin to increase. Dreams become vivid, symbolic, and insightful. The unconscious rewards those who guard their inner light. Life starts to send you reflections of equal awareness. Those who no longer wish to feed on you, but to evolve alongside you, for the cosmos honors boundaries. It cannot deliver to you what you are not willing to own. The empath's no is, in its essence, an invocation of the true self. It is a summons to awaken the divine principle of order amidst the chaos of emotional entanglement. It is the alchemical deed that turns compassion into consciousness, sensitivity into power, and suffering into meaning. When we speak of the word no as a sacred act, we must comprehend that it is not merely a verbal denial. It is an energetic recalibration. Every yes and no we utter vibrates through the psychic field like ripples across a pond. To say yes when your soul means no is to create an internal split, a schism in the psyche. This is not just a poetic device, it is a psychic injury. The unconscious records it as self-betrayal, and from that point, the true self starts to withdraw its guidance. You will continue to operate, to offer, to smile, but your inner compass will grow faint, and the soul will ache with a quiet, persistent resentment. That ache, that subtle sensation of being utilized or invisible, is not solely caused by others. It is the soul signaling, "You have left me once again." Each time you overgive, assimilate, or surrender your borders in the name of empathy, you reinforce the old belief that love demands self-erasure. But this is not love. It is a trance. You have been enchanted by an archetype. In the landscape of the collective unconscious, archetypes are not mere concepts. They are living, dynamic energy patterns. The empath, who cannot say no, is inhabited by what I term the wounded caregiver archetype. This archetype possesses two aspects: one luminous, one shadow-bound. In its light aspect, it brings deep compassion, service, and attunement to the human experience. But in its shadow aspect, it becomes dependent on pain, pulled compulsively towards suffering, because suffering provides it with a sense of purpose. The wounded caregiver dreads being irrelevant in calm waters. It requires turmoil to feel significant. The first emancipation, therefore, is to recognize the possession, to see clearly. It is not my essential I that always says yes. It is the archetype operating through me. Once you perceive this, you start to disentangle your core being from the collective narrative. You begin to hear your authentic voice beneath the cacophony of conditioning. The word no then arises organically, not as an act of defiance, but as a recognition of what is truly yours and what is not. This recognition signifies the commencement of individuation, that profound and sacred journey toward becoming who you truly are. But individuation demands friction, for it is only through tension that opposites unite. When an empath starts to set boundaries, they often encounter deep solitude. This solitude is not a punishment, it is a purification. You are withdrawing from psychic fusion with others. You are learning to stand within your own field of energy. It feels like isolation, because you have lived your whole life in a state of energetic blending. You mistook fusion for connection, but now the soul is instructing you in the art of self-containment, the ability to be complete without being required by another. I once wrote that the encounter of two personalities is like the mixing of two chemical agents. If any reaction occurs, both are altered. For the empath, this reaction has historically been one-directional. They dissolve, and the other is transformed. But when you begin to say no, a remarkable reversal takes place. The empath remains whole, and the other is compelled to face their own unhealed material. This is true alchemy transformation through conscious holding, not unconscious absorption. In depth psychology, we name this holding the tension of the opposites. It is the skill of remaining aware within paradox, loving someone yet declining their manipulation, caring profoundly yet choosing space. Most people cannot sustain this tension. They either withdraw entirely into cold isolation or fall back into self-sacrifice. But the empath who masters this containment becomes radiant. They learn that love does not signify merging. It means reflecting with full awareness. To grasp this mystery, we must explore the symbolic language of the psyche. The empath's no is the sword of the self, the tool that separates illusion from essence. In alchemical tradition, the sword cuts through the prima materia, the raw, chaotic mass of undifferentiated feeling. Every empath bears this sword within, but few learn to wield it with intention. They fear that to cut is to be cruel. Yet, the sword is not designed to harm. It is designed to carve form from the formless. It provides structure to compassion, direction to love, and architecture to sensitivity. Let me share the story of a man who came to me. He was kind, perceptive, deeply feeling. His life, however, was a sequence of betrayals. Friends, partners, even relatives utilized his infinite patience. He sought analysis not due to rage, but depletion. He stated, "I am so weary of being the good one." I answered, "Then perhaps it is time to be entire." Over months of exploring dreams and symbols, one vision recurred, a white bird flying into a turbulent storm, its feathers gradually darkening as it moved through the clouds. Initially, he feared the dream signified his corruption, but as we delved deeper, it became evident the bird was not perishing. It was integrating its shadow. It was no longer fleeing from darkness. It was learning to move through it. The empath's innate purity must be fortified by discernment, or it becomes gullible. To love consciously, one must embrace both light and dark within. Only then can one perceive others without delusion. This integration of shadow is the hidden heart of the empath's know. It is not a defensive barrier. It is an act of profound awareness. When you acknowledge your own potential for self-interest, anger, and harshness, you no longer need to validate your goodness through constant giving. You are free to choose when and how to offer your gifts. You love from a place of abundance, not anxiety. Every archetype seeks completeness. The empath who disowns their shadow remains partial, trapped in duality. The savior cannot exist without the victim. The giver cannot exist without the receiver. They attract one another in an endless cycle until one awakens. Saying no breaks this magnetic circuit. It is the moment the giver realizes they no longer require a receiver to define their existence. The empath steps out of the karmic pattern and becomes a conscious creator instead of an unconscious participant. At this stage, the dreams of those I work with often transform. Where once there were visions of drowning or confinement, now there appear symbols of ascent, of peaks, of vast horizons. The psyche reveals through these images that the soul is no longer submerged. It is rising towards self-governance. Yet this ascent is not an escape, it is an expansion. You begin to sense others' emotions without losing your center. You begin to perceive suffering without fusing with it. You become what the contemplatives name the witnessing consciousness, a state where awareness observes without getting entangled. This state is not cold. On the contrary, it is the origin of genuine warmth. When you are no longer enslaved by the feelings of others, your compassion becomes clearer, brighter, radiant like dawn light rather than heavy like a downpour. You see that empathy is not about feeling for others, but feeling with them, and even that with maintains a sacred space, an acknowledgement that every soul walks its own unique path. If we return to the threefold method, awakening of the container, integration through steadiness, transcendence through clarity, the empath's spirit journeys through these stages much as an alchemist moves through the great work, nigredo, albedo, rubedo, the darkening, the whitening, and the reddening. First comes dissolution, the chaos of awakening when all former roles crumble. Then purification, as you learn to distinguish what is yours from what is not. And finally, illumination, when the soul becomes whole and can love without self-loss. But do not anticipate this process to be serene. Individuation is not about comfort. It is about confrontation. The empath must confront not only the external demands but the inner critic, the part that still believes agony confirms value. This inner voice murmurs, if you stop helping, you will be isolated. If you set limits, you will be unlovable. That voice is not truth. It is the echo of early wounding. It belongs to the younger self who once linked compliance with security. When you hear it, do not suppress it. Listen with kindness. Acknowledge its attempt to protect you, and remind it, I am safe now. I can love without vanishing. As the empath fortifies their boundaries, they will encounter another paradox. The world around them may push back against their transformation. Those who once relied on their endless giving may accuse them of being detached or self-centered. This is unavoidable. Every act of individuation challenges the collective unconscious because it reveals dependency. When you change, the entire energetic system of your relationships must reconfigure. Some people will grow with you, others will recede. Both are gifts. Understand this at a profound level. The empath's no is not a dismissal of humanity but an initiation into mature love. It is the point where deep care encounters wisdom. The self, the divine core of the psyche, cannot express its full potential through a fractured vessel. It requires integrity, lucidity, and vitality. When you learn to say no, you restore the flow of life force to its rightful origin. You become a conduit of awareness rather than a reservoir for emotion. The ancient sages symbolized this with the image of the chalice, a cup that constantly overflows without being replenished will eventually break. But a cup that knows how to be emptied and refilled in rhythm with the divine pulse becomes timeless. The empath's mission is not to pour out endlessly, but to learn sacred timing to give when moved by the self, not by guilt. In this way, the small word, no, becomes a mantra of empowerment. It is the guardian at the gate of your soul, ensuring that only truth enters. Each time you speak it with consciousness, your psychic field grows stronger. You begin to sense a subtle vibration around you, a quality of quiet authority, not dominance, but profound presence. Others perceive it too. They sense that you cannot be manipulated, that your empathy is now awake, and this awakening, though silent, changes everything. Your dreams become clear, your body relaxes. The anxiety that once accompanied every emotional exchange dissipates. You no longer compulsively anticipate the needs of others. You listen, but you do not take in. You feel, but you do not carry. You love, but you do not lose yourself. This is emotional freedom, not detachment from life, but full engagement without enmeshment. There arrives a moment in the empath's journey when the act of saying no transcends ethical choice and becomes a sacred ritual of inner transformation. The empath begins to see that each boundary established is not a barrier but a circle, the circle of wholeness, the ancient mandala of the self. When you say no with awareness, you are not rejecting the world. You are drawing the circumference of your soul, defining where your divine essence begins and where illusion ends. In this manner, the no is the alchemist's seal, the sign that chaos has been contained and metamorphosis can now unfold within. This process touches upon one of the oldest mysteries in depth psychology, the sacred union of the inner masculine and feminine, or what I have termed the conjunctio of animus and anima. Every empath must eventually address this inner polarity. The incapacity to say no often springs from an imbalance between these two psychic forces. The feminine, when wounded or overextended, becomes boundless compassion without form. The masculine, when dormant, fails to offer discernment or protection. Thus, the empath exists in a state of perpetual receptivity. A field without fences, a river without banks, they flow everywhere but possess no depth. When the masculine principle awakens within the empath, It does not emerge as aggression but as lucidity. It becomes the sword-bearing guardian of the inner sanctuary. It is the force that declares, "This is mine, this is not." It is the consciousness that differentiates true empathy from enmeshment. And when the feminine principle accepts this guidance, she ceases to spill into the world's wounds and begins to nurture the self. The no is therefore not the negation of love, but the framework that enables love to endure. Without it, compassion disintegrates into exhaustion. In dreams, this integration often appears as the meeting of complements. A woman meeting a luminous man, or a man encountering a mysterious woman in a wood. These are not romantic symbols, but representations of inner unification. When you reclaim your inner masculine, you are no longer vulnerable to external authority. You no longer seek rescuers or saviors, and when you honor your inner feminine, you no longer require others to validate your sensitivity. Together, they create the psychic union that gives birth to wholeness, the sacred marriage the alchemists depicted in their enigmatic texts. The empaths know is the sacred vow of this union. It is the moment when both energies stand united and proclaim, "We will no longer divide ourselves to appease the world." From that moment forward, your relationships transform, for you no longer enter them as a fragment seeking completion. You enter as a whole being, prepared to share, not to merge. You begin to see that true intimacy is not fusion, but resonance. Two distinct frequencies harmonizing without losing their integrity. But the path to this balance is not a straight line. The psyche does not evolve through ease, it evolves through creative tension. When you begin to honor your inner no, you will meet the old deities of your psyche, the internalized voices of family, culture, and tradition, all whispering that to guard yourself is selfish, that to pause is indolence, that to assert your space is profane. These are the gods of the collective, and they demand submission, but to individuate is to gently depose them. The self must become your new center, not the expectations of the tribe. This deposing is painful, because it feels like a betrayal of all that once defined you. Many empaths describe this as an existential emptiness, a period of silence after the old patterns have fallen away, where they no longer recognize themselves. The roles that provided meaning, the healer, the supporter, the kind one, dissolve. What remains is a terrifying void. But in reality, this emptiness is not a lack. It is pure potential. It is the womb of the self, preparing to give birth to authentic being. Do not hurry to fill it. Do not distract yourself with new personas. Sit in the stillness and listen. There, beneath the static of old conditioning, you will hear a whisper that is more ancient than pain. You are not here to save the world. You are here to awaken within it. At this stage, your dreams will shift once more. You may dream of gates that finally swing open, or of illumination emerging from deep subterranean passages. These are not random pictures. They are the language of the unconscious, celebrating your liberation. The gate is the boundary once dreaded, now welcomed. The passage is the descent into your own depths, and the light is your consciousness expanding into new realms of knowing. Every empath must eventually grasp that personal energy is not limitless. The psyche operates by laws as precise as physical laws. Where your energy flows, your attention goes. Where your attention goes, your identity forms. When you perpetually direct your focus to others, your energy becomes their sustenance, and your identity melts into their stories. This is why saying no feels so disorienting initially. You are reclaiming power that has been dispersed across countless psychic landscapes. As this energy returns, it can feel like intensity, restlessness, even frustration. But this is not negativity, it is life force, it is vitality returning to its rightful home. This is what I call the sacred reclamation. You begin to remember yourself not as an empathic reflector, but as a conscious creator. You realize that empathy was never intended to diminish you. It was meant to awaken you to the interconnected web of life, not to imprison you within it. To feel profoundly is a divine capacity. To lose yourself in that feeling is a misconception. The difference lies in conscious awareness. Awareness transmutes absorption into illumination. One person once told me, "Every time I say no, I feel as though a part of me perishes." I nodded and said, "Precisely. The false self dies, and the authentic self is reborn." The empath's path is one of continual cycles of release and renewal. Each no lays to rest another illusion, and each moment of silence plants a new seed of personal power. Over time, this process crystallizes into a profound serenity. You no longer rush to repair or justify. You observe, you hold space, you see through the personas of others without judgment because you have seen through your own. At this juncture, something extraordinary happens in the empath's life field. Relationships become mirrors of mutual growth. The manipulative and the draining, unable to feed on your energy, either transform or depart. The people who remain meet you as equals. You begin to attract those who have also navigated their own shadows, who understand that love without borders is consumption. You speak less, listen more deeply, and your words carry weight because they emerge from inner alignment, not from anxiety. This is the true face of emotional freedom, the capacity to love without self-abandonment, to give without covert contracts, to feel without drowning. The empath becomes an instrument of equilibrium. In a world addicted to extremes, their sensitivity, once a source of pain, becomes their guiding star. Their discernment, once misread as aloofness, becomes their fortress. Yet, even at this stage, mindful attention is required. The unconscious moves in cycles. It will test your integration. Old configurations may reappear, cloaked as new chances. Someone will enter your life, mirroring your historical wounds. You will feel that familiar pull, the magnetic urge to rescue, to heal, to merge. This is not a step backward, but a final examination. The psyche is inquiring, have you truly embodied the lesson, or is it still just a concept? If you stay conscious, you will recognize the lure, not as love, but as repetition. You will smile, take a conscious breath, and simply say no. And in that seemingly small act, entire timelines of suffering dissolve. Do not underestimate this moment. The conscious no is one of the most potent forces in existence. It is what allows creation itself to be. Without distinction, there is no form. Without form, no experience. The divine uttered a no to formless infinity so that the cosmos could manifest. You, too, are called to reverberate that cosmic act, to say no to the chaos of emotional fusion, so that your unique expression of consciousness may stand forth. In this light, every boundary is a microscopic reenactment of creation. When you realize this, guilt evaporates. You understand that the empath's refusal is not harshness but participation in a divine blueprint. Just as the heart requires walls to contain its beat, your soul needs boundaries to sustain its unique song. You were never meant to be perpetually open. You were meant to be rhythmically open to pulse, to breathe, to expand and contract in sync with the universal rhythm. The mature empath thus becomes a living mandala, a manifestation of wholeness. Their presence itself is healing, not because they take on others' pain, but because they emanate coherence. They have become conscious stewards of their own energy system, their own psychic architecture. They no longer leak vitality, they radiate presence. This radiance, born of the sacred no, is what I name luminous empathy. It is empathy infused with wisdom, love that sees clearly without losing sight of itself. At this stage, even the tone of dreams changes. They become serene, golden, archetypal visions of temples filled with light, radiant circles, or rivers that flow steadily without flooding. These images communicate that the unconscious now collaborates with you rather than governs you. You are no longer lost in its depths. You are navigating its currents with conscious awareness. The final stage of an empath's awakening is not loud. It arrives softly, like the first light spreading across the sky after a long night. It is not marked by thunderous epiphanies, but by the profound quiet that follows the inner storms. You begin to realize that peace is not the absence of sensitivity. It is sensitivity held within a vessel of wisdom. It is the ability to feel the full spectrum of experience yet be mastered by none of it. This serenity is the harvest of every truthful no you have ever spoken. In this stillness, the empath uncovers the sacred rhythm of energy. You begin to see that life itself breathes through you, inhaling experience, exhaling meaning. Giving and receiving become a single, seamless flow. There is no compulsion to pour outward endlessly, nor fear of turning inward. You have entered the Tao of empathy, the middle way between drowning and detachment. The no longer feels like resistance. It feels like the foundational note in a symphony. It is the deep tone that allows all other melodies of your life to harmonize. The ancient sages understood this equilibrium. They called it the art of the open and closed heart. To remain open without judgment is to dissipate. To remain closed without compassion is to harden. The empath's path is to dance between these two poles, to know intuitively when to yield and when to protect. This discernment is not intellectual. It arises from the body, from an intuition refined by conscious living. When you are aligned with your core self, your very cells seem to whisper, yes, here, and no, there. You no longer need to analyze endlessly. You feel the truth before the mind can construct a story. At this stage, relationships become workshops of awareness. Every encounter, whether joyful or challenging, becomes an opportunity to practice presence. You begin to perceive projection not as an affront, but as a revelation. When someone reacts intensely to you with either admiration or hostility, you no longer personalize it. You inquire instead, what archetype have I activated within them? What unowned part of themselves are they seeing reflected in me? And then, with calm curiosity, you allow the interaction to unfold without being consumed by it. This is mastery, the capacity to remain centered within the swirling energies of the collective. The empath's great test, even after awakening, is to relapse into emotional identification. The suffering of the world can feel overwhelming. Especially as your consciousness expands, you begin to sense not just the pain of individuals, but the psychic anguish of humanity itself. This is where the practice of no becomes a spiritual discipline. Just as contemplatives withdraw into silence to preserve their inner lucidity, the awakened empath must learn to withdraw energetically when the world becomes too cacophonous. This withdrawal is not indifference. It is an act of devotion. You retreat not to escape humanity, but to reconnect with the source of your own humanity. Solitude, therefore, becomes a sacred practice. In solitude, the empath's nervous system resets, the psychic field clarifies, dreams gain depth. You may find your creative impulses stirring, writing, creating, art, meditation, simply being. The energy once expended on rescuing others now flows into acts of creation. This is how the soul heals, through authentic expression, not through endless explanation. You realize that your sensitivity was never meant to serve disorder, but to translate divine order into art, insight, and compassion that elevates without depleting. The empath who has integrated their know becomes a vessel of quiet authority. There is no longer a need to demonstrate worthiness or to perform healing. Your mere presence becomes a form of grace. When others are near you, they feel centered, not because you are carrying their burden, but because you are not. You have become a mirror of wholeness. In your reflection, others sense the possibility of their own completeness. This is the paradox of illumined empathy. You heal others most profoundly when you cease trying to heal them. The psyche, once fragmented by external demands, now reorganizes around its divine core. The self assumes its rightful throne. You begin to live from a place of inner authority, a phrase that may sound simple but contains boundless depth. Inner authority means you no longer outsource your truth to external validation. It means you consult the inner oracle before reacting to the outer chaos. When you speak, your words carry substance because they arise from stillness, not from struggle. To reach this state is to participate consciously in the divine process of becoming. Individuation does not separate you from the collective. It transforms your relationship to it. The empath, once consumed by the world's pain, now becomes a conscious participant in the world's evolution. You give not from compulsion, but from calling. You choose your engagements, your commitments, your companions with discernment. You recognize that not every plea for help is your summons to answer. Some souls need to discover their own strength in the quiet. Some struggles are essential for others to awaken. You are no longer the rescuer on call. You are the witness to divine timing. This discernment is what transmutes raw empathy into wisdom. For empathy without wisdom is self-sacrifice. Wisdom without empathy is rigidity. The fusion of the two generates true compassion, the most potent force in the human spirit. Compassion is love informed by truth. It does not hurry, it does not beg, it does not absorb, it simply sees. When you look upon another with compassion, you acknowledge their suffering while simultaneously affirming their innate capacity to heal. You say, without words, I trust in your ability to become whole. That gaze alone can catalyze profound change in the archetypal realm. This state corresponds to the figure of the sage or the elder. Having journeyed through the archetypes of the victim, the rescuer, and the martyr, the empath now embodies the mature energy of the witness healer. They move among others with a light touch, unattached to results, holding within them both tenderness and unwavering truth. This union of opposites emits an energy of peace that subtly transforms environments simply through their presence. The awakened empath becomes what the mystics named a lamp-bearer, not shining a light upon others, but reminding others of the light they already possess. And yet, the journey never truly concludes. Individuation is not a finish line but an ascending spiral. You will revisit ancient lessons from ever higher perspectives. The know will be tested repeatedly through new connections, new situations, new layers of subtle coercion masquerading as love. But now, awareness is your constant companion. The difference is no longer in what occurs, but in how you meet it. You no longer fear facing conflict, for you have made peace with necessary friction. You no longer dread disapproval, for you have encountered your shadow and found it to be a part of the whole. If you listen deeply, you will notice something wondrous. The world itself begins to reflect your wholeness back to you. The same scenarios that once trapped you now resolve with ease. The same individuals who once perplexed you now reveal their essence with transparency. Synchronicities multiply, not as supernatural events, but as natural expressions of your inner alignment. Life becomes a conversation, your consciousness communing with the cosmos through symbol and sign. Every no spoken from truth becomes an invitation for grace. I have often expressed that modern humanity's core ailment is psychic inflation, the over-identification with roles, masks, and collective beliefs. The empath's original wound was a reflection of that very illness. They over-identified with the giver, the helper, the light bringer. But true healing resides not in inflation or in denial. It resides in integration. The awakened empath does not reject either light or shadow. They walk the razor's edge between them, aware that both serve the evolution of the self. When you embody this realization, your sensitivity becomes your fortress, your boundaries become your benedictions, your solitude becomes your sacred space. You are no longer afraid of the depths, because you know the depth is where the divine resides. You begin to live as what I have termed the self in action, a being whose outer life is a direct expression of the inner order of the soul. You work, you love, you serve, but you remain anchored in that silent, unshakable center. And perhaps one day, when another tired soul sits before you, exhausted from giving, terrified to cause disappointment, you will offer a gentle smile and share with them the liberating truth that redemption begins with a single, conscious no. That one boundary, spoken with awareness, can alter the entire trajectory of a lifetime. That the soul does not evolve by pleasing the world, but by honoring its own sacred tempo. And when they ask, "But will I not lose love in the process?" you will answer, "No, dear one. You will discover it for the first time, because love, authentic love, cannot flourish where freedom is absent. Love without choice is imprisonment. Love without truth is attachment." The empath's great awakening restores the divine sequence. Freedom first, love second. For only a free soul has the capacity to love truly. And so the empath, who once bled for the world, becomes its quiet sanctuary. Not through self-sacrifice, but through embodied wholeness. Their life itself becomes the living testimony that sensitivity and strength are not opposites. That saying no to illusion is saying yes to the soul. And that emotional freedom is not a detachment from the human experience, but a profound union with the divine pattern flowing through it. When you finally understand this, not just in your mind but in every cell of your being, you will feel an inner smile, subtle, yet everlasting, rising from the very core of your existence. It will whisper, softly and surely, "You have arrived home." And home is not a location, nor is it another person. Home is the moment your soul stands sovereign in its own radiant light and declares, without anger, without fear, and without apology, no. Because within that no echoes the most ancient truth of all, that creation itself was born when the divine said no to the void and yes to being. And so, dear empath, When you say no to what drains your spirit, you are resonating with the voice of the cosmos. You are not turning away from love. You are in the process of becoming love itself.